Hello and welcome to this training from BVSC, an Impact in Action project. This training is called Practically Showing You Are Making a Difference, Overcoming Some of the Barriers to Implementing Impact Measurement. It's kindly funded by the City Bridge Trust, and thanks to them I can offer a whole heap of different ways to support your organisation that works in the Bexley Borough. And if you've done this training before, I've run through all of these quite a few times, but do get in touch if you would like to know more. Just a bit about me. I've got about 20 years experience in the charity sector, most recently in Bromley and Bexley, and I've been a development manager for 3 years in a Newham charity. So I've done this from the kind of bottom up in some of my organisations, and I've also been the person that's kind of driven it more from a lead position as well. This session has 3 main sections, and we'll look a little bit at change management just to kind of set the scene as to what we're trying to do in changing culture, in changing approach to being part of making changes in society. Then we'll look at the ingredients of an impact approach and ideas about how to overcome some of the problems that there can often be when you're trying to implement an impact approach. So the first section is change management, and I just wanted to head this up with a real grounded in real life example of when I worked for a charity, and I've worked in a range of different charities, so when I give examples, don't be too Sherlock Holmes about it and trying to work out who they are, because I have worked in a range of different organisations. But in this particular case, when I started there was no theory of change. There was a heart belief that change was happening. They could say anecdotally through case studies that there was some change, but there wasn't really any proof to go for those bigger pots of money, and the charity was in financial deficit. But through a range of different things, mainly hard work, a lot of patience, communication, sharing the reasons why we were moving towards an impact approach, and through explaining that to leadership and bringing in people who really could grasp that idea, the organisation moved to a place where they did have a theory of change, and by the time that I left, that was going to be externally reviewed by an evaluation group, which is really good, to see whether the model that this charity used could be replicated. There was a database for monitoring, and there were systems that allowed for the recording of outcomes, and that information was being disseminated in things like the annual accounts. And finally, instead of the deficit, instead there was a surplus after 3 years, with reserves and some funding for five years going forwards. So hopefully that inspires you to think, yes, this can happen, and can improve things, and hopefully in a range of different ways as well, hopefully encouraging change for the benefit of the beneficiaries. So I hope you can see this okay. This is a change curve, and I've put the link there if you want to know where I got it from. And when change happens, this change curve people can go through various different points on this change curve. Originally written, I believe, for bereavement, but really quite apt for any kind of change that could happen in an organisation as well. So energy levels can be high or low, and the bottom axis of the graph is the integration of change. It's not time. So you don't make a change and there's shock and then denial and then anger and then bargaining and then depression. It doesn't necessarily mean that over time you'll go through each of these different points, or that people in your organisation will, but it does mean that these are some of the things to watch out for, and people can kind of go backwards as well as forwards. So that different stuff can happen, and they can go back to being, instead of bargaining, to being angry. But as you can see, what we want to help people to do is to get through to the other side, where they're experimenting with ways to cope with change, where they're making a decision about which of the experiments they're going to kind of go, yeah, okay, that thing worked, I'm going to go with that, and start to integrate it and make the change embedded and real. So hopefully this gives you a really good idea of the different emotions, the different reactions that people can have, and it helps us when we think that we're doing the right thing for our organisation, for our beneficiaries, and sometimes we're met with different reactions, and so these are some of the reactions that can occur, and we want to try and minimise those, the worst parts of this change curve. So in the training session, I would be asking whether this sort of thing rings true for you and your organisation. I think it's got a lot of applications. The other thing I wanted to look at is that different personalities will react differently too, and probably spend more or less time in different parts of that change curve. Now, there are lots of different personality type questionnaires. Myers-Briggs is often used. But this is quite a simple one because you've got the D, decisive, sometimes called dominant in some versions of this model, and they're goal-driven and direct, and they're competitive and just do it, just get on with it. And as you can see at the top there, you've got outgoing. So they're at the kind of top level of being outgoing instead of reserved that you can see at the bottom. So they're outgoing. Are they task orientated or people orientated? Well, you can see here they're at the task end. They like to get things done. So a D person will be outgoing and task orientated. Whereas if we go kind of completely opposite to that, you've got a stable person. And elsewhere I've seen that written down as steady as well. So they don't like change. So as you're trying to bring about impact measurements and assessments, it's not nice for them. They want things nice and steady, but once it's there, or if they can see the benefit of that stabilisation, then they can be really good at maintaining and making sure, for example, that all your surveys are handed in on time, all your, all that analysis runs really smoothly. So they've got really good benefits on that side. They're stable, dependable, loyal. Let's do it together. Yeah. So you can look at those different personality types, the conscientious and the interactive, and have a little look on the internet if you want to compare the different ways that they're described. I would say some of the ways that I've heard it described, can be more or less helpful, and people don't always want to be pigeonholed in a particular way. So this is one of those things to take and not hold too tightly. But it can be helpful, just if you are a particular person type, to try and think, how would I react actually if I was an outgoing and people orientated person, an interactive person or influencer, and how would I communicate with that person? How would I appreciate somebody else communicating with me if I were conscientious? So a little bit more on each type in this slide, and you can look through this more at your leisure. And you can see there I'm going to pick a different one this time. So the influence person, they're really friendly. They're really good at persuading others, and their priority is, you know, how am I maintaining relationship, and how am I communicating? And they love to have some social recognition. Appears to be persuasive and enthusiastic, and fears social rejection. So in dealing with them, they want you to be enthusiastic. And people will be different mixtures of these things. So you can be a high I, or a high D, or a high S, or you can be a low I. You know, you're not too bothered by social rejection, for example, if you're a low I. But thinking about how this relates to impact assessment, how do we get across that change towards an impact approach and use the different personality types, which all bring their own unique brilliance, could bring all their unique brilliance? How can we harness that? So I'll be asking that when we do the actual training. But I've just put a few notes down here, and really this training is compressed into an hour, and I just want to give you lots of different tools, and you can pick up which ones you want and take them away and work it through for yourself. But here's an example of what I was thinking in relation to these. So if you've got some high Ds in your organisation, those people that are dominant, they're task orientated, they love the challenge, so they want that they might be good people to start off with the challenge, because they're looking at the world's my oyster. I've got a carte blanche to try and create an impact approach. So could they be the ones to have the challenge of how do we create and disseminate this theory of change, guys? You know, they could be good in the team, but you also might want to have an influencer as well, because they'll create a friendly space to discuss the theory of change. And for some of the people who might not want to openly criticise it, but might do so more behind closed doors, it's quite good to have somebody who's friendly and approachable, and somebody who can then persuade others, and persuade maybe the dominant people to kind of, you know, let's draw it back a little bit, so they can be helpful in that way. Steady people, planning the change, get them to input into how the D's ideas should be implemented step by step. So the dominant person may have brilliant ideas, run ahead with them, but how are they going to, how is the thing going to be implemented? So if steadiness is fear is unplanned change, help them to plan the change, help them to work out and see how that can be actually implemented. An impact approach, so compliance, an impact approach complies with what the Charity Commission and HMRC require. So it's worth explaining that to people, probably to all people types, but particularly for a person who wants to see how this aligns with what's required. And these people would be great for data analysis and collection. So these are the detailed people. So hopefully that gives you a flavour of how you can look at your team and see where their different place might be. Not in a hard and fast way, because we shouldn't be pigeonholing people, but appreciating the different strengths that different members of your team will be able to bring. So now this is the second section, and your organisation wants to move towards an impact approach, and you're thinking about those cycles of learning that we've learnt about before, where you're going to do plan, do, assess, review, and then it leads you back into planning again. And so that means that change will need to happen, and that change management that we've just talked about. What ingredients are there of an impact approach? Well, I've drawn this from the Coalition for Efficiency's booklet, Measuring the Good, and they've got a system for taking you through and embedding a theory of change, which is not a million miles away from the one-to-one work that I do. So these different fruits in our lovely fruit salad, the multi-level clarity of mission, theory of change, leaders who consider the data, so they're making decisions based on data rather than instinct. Robust data collection is another element. So I realised that, especially qualitative data may not always be kind of nice and neat and in a box and tidy, but that data collection, how you collect it, it should be logical as to how you're doing it that way. And then measurement leads to management. So on that plan, assess, review, when you're reviewing it, it leads to your plans changing, doesn't it? So it should help to change the management of, well, how are you doing in comparison to this or that? It should change the way that you're planning stuff. And then measurement leads to staff learning. So people, feedback happens, the loop continues and spirals upwards, so that there's improved learning. Okay, and in the session I'll ask, what are the blockages to these, and what can ruin your fruit salad? So in a way, linking this to a theory of change, if you remember, we had the needs on one side, we flip them over, and you can have the impact, the big goal at the other end. And these really are the big goals, aren't they? So you could do a theory of change for this. The big impact is that you want an increased multi-level clarity of mission. Yeah, and the need is that there is not multi-level clarity of mission. So you could do a whole theory of change on this and see what are the little steps to improving that. And my next section is an idea of lots of different steps. Not all of these may be a problem for your organisation. It might be that all of them need to be addressed. Oh, I thought I heard something in the house, which is weird because I'm by myself. So you want to move to an impact approach, and you want to do your circles of learning and improve what your organisation does. So that means changing things. And we've just talked about how change management is part of that. Understanding different personality types can be part of that, and understanding what we're working towards. So now I'm going to give you hopefully a range of different tools, Swiss Army knife toolkit, to get you thinking. So some of these will be more relevant than others, but hopefully this helps to populate the middle of your theory of change, of how you're going to change it from the lack of something, the needs, to having that, all the different things that we talked about in the ingredients of what makes a good impact assessment. So I know this is a bit busy, but my brain just kind of very busy thinking about this, because everything that I'm telling you is grounded in experience. So thinking about the character types and where they thrive, some of the people are going to want to challenge and want to see evidence. Some of them are going to want to know from a friend, will this work? Some of them will see everything in processes. And so if you're thinking about where these different, how can you help meet the needs of these different groups? So some of them will want more training that explains the why, the how. Some of them an away day session could have that training, but it could also be a point of being together socially as well, which would be great for the influencers. And then seeing where this fits into what you're doing already. So, not saying that, like, guys, we're going to sweep away everything, but instead, what bits are you doing already? So you're pointing out that this isn't a massive change for those people who are concerned about big changes, fearing unplanned change. So you're showing them where it fits into what you're doing already, which ticks their boxes. For the dominant people who are quite more comfortable with change, but they want to get tasks done, you kind of point out that it's going to help them get their tasks done even quicker. So think about how you're communicating these things, and then think about whether you can introduce the ideas and implementation in a phased way. So a really good idea for people who are really not sure about stuff is to talk about testing this out. Let's just give this a go. Excuse me. Let's just try this out until April or something, So it's not such a big fearful thing. You're just piloting. You're just giving it a go. And then think about a working group and having some influencers in there, some of the friendly people, that are very people orientated. So ideas to overcome. So one of the big issues that regularly comes up, I don't know if there is an organisation that I've worked for where time has not been the essence. People are regularly up to their eyeballs in work, and trying to carve out time that could actually save time in the future can sometimes be difficult. So you might want to think about a phased approach. You might want to spread the load with the team to work on different aspects of the work. In funding bids, are they allowing you to apply for some funding so that someone can have more hours to spearhead this? Mindset, is it a priority to ensure your work is impactful? So how much time we've got, everybody in the world has got same number of hours, not maybe daylight hours, but same number of hours in a day. And is it how they use those depends on their mindset, what's their priorities. And so it's really good to point out that, and why I spent quite a while in session number 1 explaining why an impact approach is really important. And there were lots of different reasons. I mentioned funding, I mentioned trust, but ultimately the very reason for your organisation to exist is to make a change, which is impact. So if you don't have time for impact, that could be seen as quite an issue. It surely is one of the very reasons that we're here. And if we're not happy to check that we are making an impact rather than just sort of guessing, then I would say that could be an issue. Will getting data recorded properly save angst time when you need to report to funders? So sometimes through the lifetime of a project, there's pain somewhere. You either have a bit of pain wrangling around the effort of planning it, or you get, and then maybe, or you don't have to spend that time there, you don't invest that time there, and maybe you don't get the money, and then you spend a lot of time chasing your tail trying to get the money. Or you don't do the planning, but you amazingly, you get the money, hooray, well done. Except then you come to have to report on the money, and then you're playing catch up. So surely it's better to spend a bit of time at the beginning and have the angst and the pain there in a planned way, which is less kind of under pressure than it is at the other end. or somewhere down the line. So hopefully it won't be too much angst and too much pain, but I hope that that kind of explains how at some point you've got to put investment of time in. Yeah, and just to give you a little heads up that organisations that that are happy to fund this sort of sustainability type work, this sort of monitoring and evaluation type stuff, you know, the Lloyds Foundation and the National Community Lottery. Ideas to overcome knowledge. So if you're trying to change the culture, you're trying to move people towards an impact approach, then they need to know the whys and the hows, as I said. And so think about what are those points at which they're open to hearing about that. And I would say one of the key times is when somebody joins your organisation. So during their induction, if you're setting the scene and saying, this is where we want to go, then that's really helpful, because they're obliged to be all ears when they've just started, because they're on probation. And then you update that, you continue to feed that in. So might be training, might be mentoring, might be reading, but you're just continually professionally developing them. And that leads quite nicely onto communication. So you want to communicate obviously with all of your staff about this, and you can do that internally as staff volunteers, staff meetings, trustee meetings, reports. Just think of different ways that you can embed this kind of approach. Is it part of your supervisions and your appraisals to have an impact approach? Quite often you might get asked, are you part of this? Is your work inputting into the strategic goals of X organisation? Well, that can also be tweaked to say, is it feeding into the impact approach? Yeah. Notice boards, virtual notice boards. So you might have photos that show the impact of your work, or some infographics. If you're creating them anyway to put on your website, why not print it out and have it on your notice board? A little bit different now, everybody's working virtually, but you get the same kind of idea. If you've got a place where you put your notices for your staff team, maybe a Trello board or something, then that could be somewhere where that goes. Or in our Teams group, we have a good news story section for people to explain, the benefits, especially of one of our projects called Community Connect, which has really helped people, especially over COVID. So externally, how you can communicate with the funders on the website, in social media, and so on. So yeah, once you start sharing your data on impact, it's encouraging. It's encouraging for people to see how far they've come, the difference that they're making, because for the most part, that's why they work for your organisation. So, let's use this as an encouraging thing, as well as, there may be some instances where it's a learning thing and we need to tweak our work. But yeah, let's make sure that we're using it to encourage and praise people. Okay. So that next level on, you're sort of getting to the point of embedding it. We've talked a bit about how you can use this during supervisions and appraisals. We've talked a little bit about inductions. Think about when a job description or a role description is for volunteer, does that incorporate something around an impact approach, monitoring or evaluation? If that's what they've signed up for and they know it, then it's a lot easier when the jobs are being handed out for people to get involved, because they see it as an integral part of what they signed up for. Whereas if it's a tag on, if it fits under the and anything else the organisation asks you to do, it's not really giving it a place of importance. And then obviously embedding it into your funding applications and then your funding successes. So when you're doing a funding application, and you're asking questions, and maybe people don't have the answers to that, you don't want to kind of say, oh, I told you so, I told you should have collected that data so we'd have something to tell the funders. But it can be a point at which you can kind of say, oh, well, for the next round of funding, it'd be really helpful if we had, and just help people to see how this can be really helpful and save them time when an application is being made. Likewise, when there's a funding success and the funder says, I will be asking you to do a report on this, this, and this outcome, you need to feed that to the project staff and the people working on the ground. They need to know what the timescale is. They need to know that they are going to be held account, and needing to provide this information. So you might want to have a meeting with them, provide them with the notes, tell them where there's a hard copy or a copy in your shared area. Okay. Just to note that sometimes, and I covered this a bit in what funders want, but check out what they mean by an outcome or impact. So different funders can mean different things, and just check what level they're at. And then if you're awarded funding, sometimes you're required to measure extra things, and you're going to need to just check that fits within your processes and have a little negotiation with them if necessary. So just to give you a couple of examples of organisations that where I've seen this happen. So I was recruited to the organisation that I mentioned before, and they were in deficit. So they thought they needed money, which was true. They did, because they needed to pay the staff. There wasn't many at that point, but anyway, and they needed. But in reality, before they could even get to that stage, they needed to do some other things, including to prove their impact. So you know, because the funder was saying, I need X, Y, and Z, I was able to explain well to the trustees and to the staff, well, I need X, Y, Z. So it did drive us in the direction of best practice. I would say be a bit careful, because otherwise people feel that it's the funder dictating what they do, not realising that actually we're doing this all for the beneficiary. And then I applied for funding for someone to help with the monitoring and evaluation, and was successful. And so that really helped in terms of very small team, not a lot of time. And it was a fund where we couldn't apply for the current staff. So I was having to do that in tandem, apply for the current staff and for this new staff member. And then, you know, it kept improving the reports to trustees and the feedback to staff. And it kind of, yeah, you know, they got the database and they were really going for it. And then they saw, you know, the change in the beneficiaries on paper, as well as you know, for the trustees who didn't necessarily get to meet the beneficiaries all the time. That was really good. And then I also recruited new trustees, and in their inductions and training introduced these ideas. So it just really added weight to that. And here another example. So in this organisation, the funding was primarily from individuals. And so again, there hadn't been that need to evidence impact. And so some of the things that I encouraged here was a section in the away day training that reached people at all different levels, because everybody had to go to the training, the trustees, some of the volunteers came, and the staff came. So everybody had that kind of broad idea of what an impact was. And there was further training for like particular groups such as project staff, volunteers, plus me explaining it through on an ad hoc basis to those who needed it. I found it really useful to have an external person, and this is a repetitive theme that comes up. Sometimes having somebody else, and you can use me for this. A lot of organisations are saying to me, like, come in, Karen, because it'll keep us accountable. It'll mean like we're obliged to have, you know, come up with our first draft of a theory of change. If we know that you're coming in on the 7th of January or whatever, you know, we've got that deadline then, and we'll be embarrassed if we don't meet it, sort of thing. So yeah, using an external person can be helpful. You know, I discussed whether job descriptions could be updated to incorporate the monitoring and evaluation. And then once we had impact data, I was able to share that, and that went onto social media and stuff. And our staff started to see their own, you know, page from the social media, and to be impressed by that. And I would like send a little email going, wow, that's amazing. Did you know that? And I would share a statistic, and it was really encouraging actually, because there was nothing to hide. When they said, oh, we feel that we're doing a good job, they really were. But now we could evidence it, not because we were saying it, but because our beneficiaries were saying it, because other groups involved, other stakeholders involved were saying it as well. So it just assures people that they really are making a difference, and encourages them. And then when we got funding, I would send out an email with the requirements annotated with who needed to do what. I would give them a copy of that, a hard copy, because it's an important thing to remember. It's important enough that they have a hard copy. might be harder now, people are working remotely, but even so, I think it might even be something worth posting, you know, in this case, because it's really essential that people know this, and that they know if they hand over, if they finish in their role, they need to, this is something so key to hand over to the next person. So yeah, those are some examples of how I've pulled together some of those things from the different Swiss Army toolkit, if you like, to make our lovely fruit salad. And hopefully, as a result, your organisation can work gradually from wherever it is, whether you're just you know, on that little scooter at the moment, or the skateboard, right up to the Rolls Royce. Hopefully there's something in this training that just gives you that nugget of like, yeah, I could try that, or yeah, I could do this. So there will be a link once I do the real slide for this to do the survey response. And if you use this training, it's really, really helpful for me to know, because I have to prove my impact to City Bridge Truth. So thank you very much for your time, and do get in touch if you've got any queries.